I finally got to play Tiny Tina's Wonderlands, and my thoughts, much like the game, are kind of all over the place. Let's talk about it. What's up, everybody? Welcome to Crossplay. I'm Pastor Mark, and I want to talk to you about Tiny Tina's Wonderlands, a game brought to you by the developers of the Borderlands series. And I want to be as upfront as possible in my discussion about this game on a few things. First, this is not a review. I have not beaten the game. I have not done an exhaustive playthrough of the game. This is just my impressions of the game so far. I've played about 10 or so hours of the game, and I really don't plan on beating the game. I'll get to more of that later, but I don't feel like I can do a review because I haven't played enough of the game to adequately speak to every aspect of the game. Second, I want to be upfront and say that I've never really been a huge fan of the Borderlands series. I've played the games, I've never beaten them. I played about 20 or 30 hours of Borderlands 3. I played a little bit of Borderlands 2, probably around the same amount of time, 20 to 30 hours. And I just kept running into the point where the gunplay was fun, the gameplay loop just didn't really grab me. I don't really play games for these in-depth, crazy loot systems. It's not why I play games. They just didn't really grab me like they grabbed a lot of other people. And although there are some pretty big differences between Tiny Tina's Wonderlands and the Borderlands series, it's still pretty much a Borderlands game through and through in terms of the looter-shooter aspect of the game. So with all that being said, let's talk about the game. If you're unfamiliar, Tiny Tina's Wonderlands is basically a parody slash rip-off kind of a Dungeons and Dragons game. At least that's how the story is told. At the beginning of the game, you are introduced to the main characters and Tiny Tina, who is your dungeon master, and that's how the game and the story of the game unfolds. And at first, I was really excited to jump into this game because I thought that a change of scenery and a change of how they're telling the story would kind of change how the formula of these Borderlands type games work. But that's not really the case. This game, at least in the combat, still plays almost exactly like a Borderlands game. So if you love Borderlands, if you love that looter-shooter loop of shooting and looting, you'll probably really enjoy this game. And if you don't enjoy that gameplay loop, you might end up like me and kind of getting burned out on it. But let's start with some of the stuff that I like about this game. Like I said, I'm probably 10 or so hours into this game at this point, and there are some really great things about this game. There's a lot of stuff to enjoy about this game. First, I love that this game is very self-aware. It's very aware of the genre of Dungeons and Dragons and that type of world. And it's really funny to hear some of the conversations where the dungeon master, Tiny Tina, and the other main characters kind of have this fun back and forth like you would in a real Dungeons and Dragons game. Second, even though I'm not a huge fan of the looter-shooter gameplay loop, the combat is genuinely really fun. This is a combat system that Gearbox has spent years refining and working on, and you can really feel that in this game. This game is really smooth in terms of the combat, and I really enjoyed a lot of the combat that I was in. And after about 10 hours, that's pretty much all I really like about the game. And so now I want to talk about some of the issues that I have with this game. And that's why I'm emphasizing because this is personal. This is just my preference when it comes to playing these types of games. And first, and this is probably the most objective thing I can say, this was one of the buggiest games I've ever played in the first probably 5 minutes. It took me forever to get this game up and running. Now, I'm playing on a PlayStation 5, so maybe your experience is different, or maybe you're playing on a PlayStation 5 and you don't have this experience. But this was a rough start for me downloading the game to my system. That all went fine. And then when I opened the game and clicked new game, the whole screen just blacked out. And so I thought for a second, oh, it's either a loading screen or maybe the game just starts with a black cutscene. And then I waited and waited and waited and nothing happened. And so I thought, okay, maybe the game just froze or glitched out. I'll just close out of the game and try it again. Same thing happened. Started a new game, black screen. I thought, okay, maybe there's a bug in my PlayStation or something. So I turned off the PlayStation, did a hard reset, went through that whole process. Same thing. Started a new game, black screen. I thought, what in the world is going on? Until I realized that the cutscene was actually playing, I just couldn't see or hear it. Because if I hit the PlayStation button and went to my kind of half PlayStation menu, the weird PlayStation user interface thing, with that menu open, I could see and hear the cutscene. And it wasn't until I really dove into the system settings on the PlayStation and it had to turn off my variable refresh rate, I had to turn off HDR, and I had to turn off automatic resolution and set that to a specific resolution, then I could go into the game and stop this weird blackout thing from happening. That legitimately probably took 20 or 30 minutes of troubleshooting. Not a good first impression, and I have never had a game do that before. This is the only game where I've had to turn off VRR, HDR, and automatic resolution. I normally have those on for every other game I play, and I never have any issues. So that was really weird. Again, maybe that's just my experience. Maybe that's just my PlayStation being weird, or maybe it's me being weird. I don't know. but that's what happened. Not a super fun way to start the game. But then after you finish that intro cutscene that I was finally able to watch, you go into another cutscene, and then you go into some dialogue, and some more dialogue, and more dialogue. And it was about 2 hours into the game where I realized there is someone talking in this game constantly. There is never a quiet moment unless you physically stop moving in the overworld, and even then, there's still conversations happening. There is someone talking all the time in this game. It's either Tiny Tina as the dungeon master, or it's one of the other main characters, or it's the villain, or it's a side quest character, or it's your character. Someone is always giving a voiceover to something all the time. And fine, whatever. You want people to talk all the time, maybe there's a need for that. But my other issue with the dialogue in this game is that you can't skip it. It's 2022, and I should be able to skip any cutscene or dialogue that I want to skip. And because a lot of your interactions are not cutscenes, you're forced to just listen to this dialogue. And believe me when I say that some of even the most random side characters will go on these long dialogue sessions where what they could have said could have been summed up in about 8 words. And even if it's a piece of dialogue that you can walk away from and do other things, even if you walk away from the character, they pop up as an icon on your screen and you have to hear all of the dialogue that's being said. But one of the weird things that I noticed with the dialogue, and again, maybe this is just me missing something, is that you have these 2 other main characters. So you have Tiny Tina, the dungeon master, and then you have characters voiced by Andy Samberg and Wanda Sykes, which is cool because these are notable actors. It's notable talent in the game. It should be fun to listen to. And after a while, I started asking, where are these characters in the game? You have the dungeon master, which it makes sense that Tiny Tina wouldn't be in the game, but you have these other 2 characters that react to things going on in the world around you, and they're saying things to you, and you're responding to them, but they're nowhere to be found in the game. They're just like additional voices with the narrator, with Tiny Tina, and they're just kind of there voicing things, but you'd never get to interact with them in the game. They're not co-op partners that I can see. And again, maybe I'm missing something, but you just have these voices from Andy Samberg and Wanda Sykes, but you never see their characters other than the icons talking to you. And when it comes to this dialogue that's never ending, and you have actors like Andy Samberg and Wanda Sykes, and you have Will Arnett voicing the villain, you would think that a lot of that would really hit well, but a lot of the dialogue and the humor just kind of falls flat, at least for me. Like, a lot of the jokes in the game feel like jokes that you would find in the bathroom written on the walls of a high school. Like I said, some of the self-aware humor about nerd culture and Dungeons and Dragons, some of that really lands, and some of the other jokes are funny and had me chuckling, but a lot of the humor is just kind of this, I don't know, to me it feels like this immature, potty humor where it's like people say but and you're supposed to laugh. And you get these kind of jokes all the time because, again, someone is always talking in this game. But I want to circle back to some of the technical issues because aside from my experience of starting the game, I feel like this game is not really optimized for PlayStation 5. Like, there was a few frame drops, there's a few things skipping around, and there's a bunch of loading screens throughout this game. Now, I'm not saying that because I have a PlayStation 5, I should never see a loading screen ever again, but it's not like the areas that they're loading are these vast open worlds with all of this rich amount of detail, or that you're going from one area that's completely different from the next. You have this very simple Dungeons and Dragons overworld map that you walk around as kind of like a chibi character, and then you go into a combat encounter, or you go into a town, and you have this 5 to 10 second loading screen every time you're coming in and out of these areas. And I don't know, it just felt weird. I haven't played a PlayStation 5 game like that in a long time. And I mentioned combat encounters, and I want to get back to that because that to me is one of the weirdest changes from a Borderlands series game. Because in Borderlands, you were kind of free to move throughout the world from large area to large area, but because this is a Dungeons and Dragons game, you have this open world where you kind of dip into combat encounters. And for me, that kind of took away a lot of the fun because in Borderlands, you're able to go through these vast open areas and find all of these encounters kind of organically throughout the game. And now combat in Tiny Tina's Wonderland feels very sectioned off into these very specific arenas that you'll play in the same arenas over and over again. And if you walk through tall grass, you might get a random encounter like you're playing Pokemon. And I don't know, to me, that just kind of took away a lot of the fun of exploring in Borderlands versus this just feeling kind of, I don't know, sectioned and formulaic, if that's the right word. And the combat encounters were very confusing for me because it says you're in a combat encounter and the goal of the combat encounter is to clear the enemies. That's what it tells you to do, clear the enemies. And it shows you the enemies on your little mini map, on your radar. You can see the red dots where the enemies are. But in my experience, the encounter will end before you clear the map of enemies. Like you'll be fighting and you'll be taking out enemies and you're working through the little red dots on your map and you'll take someone out and the encounter will end and you'll have like 5 more dots on your radar. And it's like you hit some sort of secret quota that cleared the encounter even though there were still enemies on the map. And the encounter will finish and all the enemies will disappear. And I was always left thinking I had more to do, but the encounter was just... it finished. But like I said earlier, the combat, when you're actually in combat, does feel like a Borderlands game. And the loot system in the game does feel like a Borderlands game. So if you're a fan of Borderlands, I think you'll really enjoy that aspect of the game because it still has that classic Borderlands gameplay loop of shoot, loot, repeat. But for me personally, I don't really know what to do with Tiny Tina's Wonderlands. I'm going to keep playing it, and maybe after another 10 or so hours, maybe things will finally click for me. Maybe I'll understand the gameplay loop, and that'll really hook me in. I'm hoping it's not like a Final Fantasy 13 thing where it's like, oh, after 30 hours, it really gets good. That's not how you build a good game. But I'll let you know if that happens. But right now, I want to know your thoughts. What am I missing about this game? Is there something about the Borderlands experience or the Tiny Tina Wonderlands experience that I'm just not understanding? And if I understand that thing, the game will click for me? Are you kind of in my camp where it just feels like these games just don't really hook you, they don't really click? Or are you not happy with the changes that have been made from Borderlands into this spinoff? I want to know your thoughts. What are you thinking about this game? And as with every video, I want you to know that I am praying for you. If you are watching this video, I have prayed for you. And if you have a specific prayer request, you can go ahead and leave a comment and I will pray for you specifically. So thanks for checking out this video. Remember that God loves you. I'm praying for you, and I'll see you in the next video.